we see this stuff as primitive, as, kind of weird and crazy. We call a lot of these things rituals, sacrifices and stuff that means bad things to us. But to these people, to the ancients, this stuff was normal. They understood what it was and what they were doing. They understood the meaning behind it and the science behind it. See, we took those aspects, those things that they was trying to get out of these so-called rituals in their culture. We took these things and we identified them with math and science and things that we invented, things that, human beings made up. But to the ancients, this was just normal stuff, normal common sense stuff, normal things that they understood how to do to bring about results, to change their reality. And when you start to understand that and think about it in those contexts and just say, this is something that is natural, there's power to it. These people was doing this stuff for a reason. You start looking at it in a different light and understanding that in order to get out of it what the ancients got out of it, you have to embrace it the same way they embraced it, as far as putting it in your ordinary life, your everyday life, and not thinking about this stuff in terms of ritual, sacrifice, math, science, or what have you. This is how we label this stuff. But to the ancients, there was no such thing. They didn't use these words. This is natural things, natural stuff. And I want to say that to get it across to people to understand that you have been basically deceived by words and wordplay. Words are magic. You have to understand that it was created for a specific reason, to deceive you and to confuse you. But you have to look through that and understand that at a particular time, these words did not exist. Yet the power of what you're bringing together using words was always here, and it has a purpose. Now, when I look back to ancient Kemet and I seen karate, when I seen the depictions of martial arts, to me at first it was just like, well, okay, wow, this stuff was here so long ago. We thought it came from the Orient, came from, the Asians, but here it is in ancient Kemet, old. And to my knowledge, there isn't any depictions of martial arts that predate what we find in ancient Kemet, which we can find going back to 3000 BCE. So unless somebody can produce anything that shows that they had these particular skills and was putting stuff out before then to us, the Egyptians came up with it. They developed the techniques or what have you. But from looking at it, you would just think, hey, this is about, self-defense, martial arts protection, Kemet always was under threat at some point in time. But when you go back 3000 BCE, it wasn't too much problems that you would think they would need to develop such a, technique and a strategy. So in looking at it on the surface, I was thinking, okay, well, this is the purpose. This is what it was for. But as I have explained and showed you guys, the ancient Egyptians knew the body. They knew about the mind. They knew all of this stuff, and they put it in so many different things. Now, I have talked to you about how hip hop music, how we have the subliminal message, how we have the controlling of our minds and music, and how music affects the brain. I've talked about this countless times and will continue to talk about it. But you have to understand that the ancient Egyptians already knew about it. They understood how music affects the brain. So when you see ancient Egyptian depictions of music bands, them playing musical instruments, we would call it today classical music, developing the mind, stimulating the mind, as I talked about. When you see depictions of them dancing, singing, we would call this stuff, ballet, R&B or soul or whatever. We will call it what we call it. But to them, this was just natural. So when you see these depictions of dancing and, and singing and bands playing and all kinds of stuff that we look at today and we take an entertainment value from it. And we look to ancient Kemet and we would think the same, but it's a lot more to it that the ancient Egyptians understood, and they knew how to get everything out of it. So when we look at, martial arts, when we look at this stuff, these depictions, and we say that, this stuff is martial arts, we think about kung fu, we think about karate or what have you when we see these depictions. But to them, it wasn't such. Of course, they didn't use those names. But the ancient Egyptians understood the movement. They understood what the stuff was really about and what it would do. They understood that these movements not only, strengthened the muscles, but it sharpened the mind. These movements allow energy to flow. through the body, to flow in different parts of the body. Different movements just loosen up the body and allow energy to flow, so you can feel energy flowing freely through different parts of the body. And this is one of the main reasons why they did it. It not only, help sharpen the mind, help you connect muscle memory to, cognitive memory to your consciousness, but it also help with meditation. It also help you strengthen the muscles so you can sit in the lotus position, a meditative state, for long periods of time. And this is one of the ways that they did it. This is one of the ways they developed to help you deal with those issues. And this is one of the processes you had to go through in becoming, like, let's just say, like a grand master or a master, or moving up as far as in the ancient Egyptian mystery school. Martial arts was one of it. And you had to understand, about the body, of course, and that these movements were to loosen you up, to help energy flow freely. When the Asians talk about chi flowing through the body, they understood all of this, and that energy needed to flow freely, and you needed to be loose and be able to be comfortable to sit in that lotus position for long periods of time to meditate. So they worked on these things, and this was the purpose of this stuff, to not only, help you with meditation and help energy flow, but to also give you skills as far as movement and combat ability, in any type of altercations that might occur. So when you look at the ancient Egyptians and understand that they had basically what we call classical music, as I said, develops the brain, stimulates the brain, makes you smarter, makes you retain more knowledge. They understood this. When you look at the depictions and see that they had forms of ballet that help with movement, grace, something that help you develop energy-wise. All these things that we see, that we find today in our society, that we look at too as being refined, showing that these people have class, that they are of a high status because they, partake in such events. So as I talked about in the calculated destruction of the black man and woman, about how they got all dressed up and fancy and went to watch people, put on tutus and do ballet and, play classical music or what have you. This was because they associated these things with, wealth, refinement, or what have you. And many of the people there had absolutely no clue that this stuff goes back to energy, consciousness, and that it's going to develop you better in these areas and help stimulate you. So they basically took the good things from us, from ancient Kemet, the things that will help us develop and stimulate us spiritually and physically. They took these things out of ancient Kemet, kept them for themselves, told us nothing about it. We just watched and wondered, like, what are these crazy people doing? Took it for themselves. We were stuck to, just develop jazz, the blues, singing about our sorrows and pain, not listening to music that will help stimulate us. And don't get me wrong, you have the blues and you have jazz that does create good stimulation, but not as such as with classical music, because when you have blues and you have jazz not always, but blues, you have words attached to it. Having words attached that is not going to be, stimulus to the actual sound. So words that's not going to help develop the sound, then it's really no point in having the words. The words could be a problem because, as I talked about, when you combine words with music, that's a message. Words are powerful. You got to be careful what you say. So you don't really want to associate certain words in musical form because they have dual meaning. It's better to just have the music. This is something deep that we'll get into down the line when we get more into music, but the ancient Egyptians understood this. This is why, as I talked about in the Frequency DVD, about them combining Satan and putting him with music and, the music industry, and how the word was God and Satan was the music. And when you combine the two, you have basically persuasion. And that's what it was about. So when you understand the parable and what it was talking about, Satan basically played the music, the choir director, you could say, while God was the word. And he spoke, and you combine them and you have song, which music can be stimulating and persuasive. Music on its own without the words can be persuasive. So this is just a whole bunch of things that just go along, with everything. But understand how they took classical music, they took ballet, It took everything that would stimulate them and develop them to be higher and function in higher brain capacities than us. They kept for themselves, and we end up with gangster rap, hip hop, R&B, stuff that is destroying us mentally and physically, causing the downfall of our civilization, causing the downfall of us. And this is what we have to deal with, and this is what they allow us to promote and make our people rich off, because it's destroying us more than it's helping us. So we got to look at this stuff and understand that if it wasn't ancient Kemet, it was there for a reason. And this stuff we need to come back to and start, developing more ourselves and getting more engaged in ourselves, instead of leaving it to the Europeans to have and take and control when it came from us. And it's crazy when you look at other civilizations, you look at people throughout history that are known for things. They're known for something specific. You look at countries that are known for something specific, groups of people known for something specific. And then you go back to ancient Kemet and you find out, guess what? It was there first. And it's like, damn, no credit was given. Nobody said anything. It's just we was led to believe that certain people developed certain things. But then when we go back to ancient Kemet, we see that it was there first. And, somebody always throw that little depiction in there, whether it's believed that the ancient Egyptians discovered it, or that, it was found first here in ancient Kemet, always to leave doubt that it's possibly somebody who developed it before them. But there's no proof. So it's weird when you find that kind of stuff. But when you go back and you see the depictions of martial arts, and you think about, Bruce Lee, who we'll get into a lot in this video, and you think about just martial arts in Asia, and a lot of people don't have no clue exactly where it came from. We just all assume it came from, ancient Asia with the Asians. But when you go to ancient Kemet and look at martial arts, they call it lotus fighting, which we understood how important the lotus was to ancient Kemet. It symbolized rebirth, with the opening of the petals when the sun rises and the closing of the petals at night. They related it to the sun, of course, which the sun was revered. When you look at it in Buddhism, of course, the same thing. The lotus symbolized spiritual awakening and purity, because you had a lotus, which is also called a water lily, which basically sprang up, from the dirt, the dirty water, from the water, what have you, and came out and, opened up perfectly clean, pure, no dirt, no mud, no soot, or nothing on the petals. It always sprang and opened up clean and clear. And the Buddhists looked at it as, the lotus made a conscious decision to basically say, I'm not going to get dirty. I'm going to come up, I'm going to be clean, I'm going to be pristine in good condition, and I'm going to show off. And this is how, the Buddhists looked at it, so they associated with spiritual enlightenment, the lotus, which is why Buddha, you always see him sitting on top of the lotus in the lotus position, which is why they call it that, because they associate meditation, of course, with spiritual enlightenment, as well as the lotus. And we see, as I talked about before in Buddhism, how it goes hand in hand with Osiris and the lotus, and, Shiva and what have you, everything we find with the lotus. And I showed you in Buddhism 1 and 2 about how there is no way you can look at Buddhism and not trace it back to ancient Kemet and see that that's where it came from. It's clear as day when you look at this stuff. So you can do your own research on that and just look and see the comparisons. There's just no way. So you have to think about, ancient India, trading, and what was going on around that time. Now, we know they had Heraclion, which sank, the whole city I talk about that Frank Gaudio discovered, Heraclion that sank. And this was a huge trading port that so many civilizations came in and out and did trade. We talked about in Ancient History Part 1 about Tyre, about how, the Phoenicians did trade there, and how another huge trade port. But when you look at where India is and think about so much of the trade going on in those two places, and, of course, in India, they wasn't going to take that long, camel caravan ride all the way up to Tyre or Heraclion to do trades. So they had to sail across, which was a lot easier, into Ethiopia, and vice versa. The Africans sailed into India to do trade. Now, when you look at, the map, and you understand, of course, we have the Nile. We have the Nile all up and down the Nile. You had little trade ports there, and people that traded up and down the Nile. And when you pay attention, you have the Nile coming down into northern Sudan. And it basically separates, like right at the middle part of Sudan, and you have it going one way towards Ethiopia. It basically goes into Ethiopia and curls up into Axum. And you have the Blue Nile there. That's the Blue Nile that curls up into Axum in Ethiopia. Then it keeps going south, and you have the White Nile. But the Nile definitely went into Ethiopia with the Blue Nile. You have there one of the greatest African civilizations right off the Nile. You have the Aksumite Empire, another African civilization where you had African kings and rulers that ruled there, and they had a thriving port there and a thriving civilization right off the Nile that a lot of people have no clue about. Now, we're going to get into this history because it's very important. Now, it basically goes with everything anyway. It's one of the things a lot of people don't understand about the connection between Africa and Rome and how you can see how they was coming into Africa a lot and doing things. This is completely hidden from history, and it's stuff that they just don't talk about, because when you understand the history, it's like, what the fuck was Rome doing? It's how you can see who's in power and who was doing what when you understand about these African empires that once existed. So we're going to talk about this because it fits and it goes in, with the line of history. So understand, one, when you talk about the Aksumite Empire, we're talking about, these are the kings that they call Negus. When you hear people refer to kings as Negus, the black African kings, this was in Ethiopia. So you had this whole empire last from about the 1st century AD up until like the 4th century AD, I believe, or the 10th century AD, I should say. And it lasts for a long time. This was a thriving area. It was once part of the Kushite Empire at one time, and it separated, and you have this huge thriving empire that Rome knows a lot about. So you had the King Izana, basically convert the civilization to Christianity. Now we have correspondence between Constantine and King Izana. Constantine calling him his brother, his friend. So we have letters that they wrote, correspondence between each other with them being on good terms. Now, I have a lot of knowledgeable Christians, the ones who know some things, who think I don't know anything. I have a lot. It's a lot of debates I do behind the scenes that you guys don't know. People don't want to do it, video wise or, publicly. They want to do it in messages or what have you. But I have had quite a few people bring up King Izana as far as giving validity to the Ethiopian Bible and giving validity to somehow the Africans developing Christianity in the Bible. The problem is when you get a person who does actual research, one of the things that this land is famous for, the Aksumite Empire is famous for, is its obelisks. They have a bunch of obelisks there and a bunch of stelas there showing the connection to Nubia and ancient Kemet. So we find stelas in Nubia, we find obelisks in ancient Kemet. We know that they came down. The Nile is right there, flows right into their land. Obviously, the ancient Egyptians was coming down and trading. We know about the connections between them all. So you have the ancient Egyptian influence with these obelisks and these stelas in Ethiopia and the Aksumite Empire before, King Izana converted to Christianity. The knowledge was lost, and there was no real connection to the understanding of what was going on back then and what the connection was with ancient Kemet. So you had this king come about and convert to Christianity, most likely for political reasons or political gain or what have you. And that's what happened. And when you put in, Constantine into the mix, you can see exactly what it was. But you have for centuries, the Romans, which the Romans used Oximus as a trade port, a trade route. They basically did a lot of trade out of that port. This is why Constantine and King Izana was so cool, because he allowed them to do a lot of business there. So understand that. So we understand that they took, so many artifacts from out of there. We have in 1932, you have Rome basically come in there and pick up one of the obelisks, that they knocked down a long time ago. I showed you the pictures. that they was just pulling down. They came in there and it was pulling down the obelisk to basically try to hide the connection with ancient Kemet. And they came in Oximus and pulled down a lot of these stelas and a lot of the obelisks, and they broke. A lot of them broke, when they came down. So you had in 1932 Rome come in there and basically pick up the pieces of one and take it back to Rome. So when you go into Britain, when you go into a lot of these museums, you find a lot of ancient Egyptian artifacts, a lot of African artifacts, because the Brits, you have the Romans, you have a lot of these civilizations, these people coming into African civilizations, ancient civilizations, and stealing artifacts. If it wasn't for people like Richard Pankhurst, who basically leads a team who goes into a lot of these countries and try to get the artifacts back, the Ethiopians wouldn't have gotten back the obelisk from Rome. They got it back in 2005 because they led a team and did a lot of lobbying to get that obelisk returned back to the Ethiopians. In 2005, they got it returned back. But you had the Africans and you had a lot of European groups who have for years. It's another thing that is not talked about that a lot of people don't know about. That's why I always try to talk about unity, because I've seen it in action and I've seen us get things done with unity. But if it wasn't for these Africans working together with these Europeans to go into a lot of different places, not just in Europe, but in Asia as well, into a lot of these museums that have a lot of African artifacts, to get these things returned back to the people.